are discrepancies between the MSBA guidelines and our identified program space needs, we have to be able to justify those needs to the MSBA in order for them to approve that above their guidelines. It's also important to understand that there's a direct relationship between the size of the final approved program space and how much space MSBA will provide reimbursement for. An example of that is if our final total program space submission is 1,000 square feet more than the MSBA guidelines, there's a strong possibility that the MSBA would not offer reimbursement for the additional 1,000 square feet, and so that cost would have to be borne 100% by the community. So that's an important process for us to go through. And as a reminder, Winchester's base reimbursement rate is 33.95%. So if a project cost $100, the base rate that the town would be reimbursed is $33.95. And the feasibility study, the total cost, which is about $1.3 million, the state is reimbursing us for just under 34% of that cost. In our informal discussion with the MSBA about the possibility of including dedicated community space in a proposed project, we were reminded by MSBA that MSBA will not provide reimbursement for dedicated community use space. So that does not mean necessarily that MSBA would not approve a project that has dedicated community space as part of it, but that the cost of that space would again have to be borne, 100% of that would have to be borne by the community. So that was good for us to have that informal discussion with MSBA and get a sense from them that there are certainly possibilities for such space, but that the cost of that space, again, would not be reimbursable. I'd like to introduce Alex Pitkin, who will go through the educational program space update.
Good evening. Thank you, Bill. And I just want to stress a little bit on this slide how important this meeting was with the MSBA, because we are looking to maximize that 33.95% reimbursable on anything that is categorized as reimbursable. So it behooves the entire team to really be working hard on your interest to make sure that all the space and all of the categories do have funds flowing to them. So it's a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, and that's a great starting point that we had last month. That doesn't often happen, but we have a great team down at MSBA working with us as well. This is a very important slide as we talk about that meeting with MSBA. We're not going to get into the weeds on the program, but what does the educational program actually mean? It means that it's a list of all of the spaces that fulfill the delivery of education in your school at the high school. So as we're going through and fine-tuning that, as Superintendent McAuliffe has just notified, we're very close to arriving at the end of that list of spaces so that we can submit it with our preferred design program submission as part of this feasibility study. Well, there are a couple of inherent issues that come up whenever we start to talk about renovations or potential new projects. And so that's really the heart of a lot of what this feasibility study gets to. So I'll ask you to look at the slide here, the educational program slide that talks about the categorization of all the space in this building today. The left-hand column at the very top, 260,000 gross square feet. Well, not all of that space is useful to you in your educational program. There are toilets in there, there are boiler rooms, there are very large locker rooms, etc. So when we talk about arriving and delivering the program within that, you're going to see that there will be a delta of space. One of the other things of discovery that came out of our analysis early on and really over the summer was that next line down, which is the non-habitable basement space. And that space that's never going to be useful for us in the program. And as we work through the project, if the building is renovated, what we do with that space to either spend as little money as possible on it or whether we abandon it in place, whatever it takes, we're going to figure that out. But we really need MSBA to understand that it's built, it exists, and by code we have to deal with it in some fashion. And so that brings you to a total area of 280,000 gross square feet that might try to adapt in an addition or renovation scenario for your high school. So the middle column talks about some of the scenarios that you're going to see in a little bit. What might we be looking at or anticipating if we try to place your program, as we've been designing and working with the staff and your administrators and educators towards. And so you start to see the number of 292,000, and that 32,000 square feet has some caveats in it, and that's because you do have today a field house / gymnasium that's roughly 24,000 square feet. If you were to look at the MSBA program, their allowable is 12,000 square feet, and they may allow us to build larger than that, whether reimbursed or not. So inherent in that, you've got almost 18,000 square feet that is not going to go towards, let's say, science labs or towards general classrooms. Okay, so that's why that number, that 290,000 square foot number, is much larger than the right column, which is if we were to build a brand new high school, we would anticipate an overall gross square footage of a building at about 288,000 square feet. So you have to look very careful at these numbers. There's going to be probably a little bit of confusion about that, but it also means you have a smaller gymnasium in a building of that size. And those are some of the inherent issues that the EFPBC will be weighing as we go forward. The pros and cons of using the existing buildings, and there are benefits, and then the cons of using the existing building versus trying to build new. So right underneath it, that very first bullet point speaks to the MSBA guidelines, again, trying to maximize the reimbursable dollars that come back to your community for this project, the 235,000 square feet. Again, it's not saying the state has not told us and MSBA has not told us you can't build anything bigger than that, but it's going to be part of this negotiation coming out of the feasibility study. And just to reiterate, a lot of conversation, a lot of hard work before the summer started with the staff, and then very excitingly today, we spent a good amount of time with, I think, 35 to 40 people doing a visioning session. And we've hired a consultant, which is Frank Locker, who I'm going to introduce. He's going to talk a little bit about today's proceedings and some of the exciting concepts that he was talking about for 21st century education at your high school.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Yeah, we had about 35 people. We worked all day long. Those folks included teachers, students, community members, and a lot of parents. We spent most of the day engaged in dialogue with those 35 people, working in small groups, about six to eight people, responding to a set of issues that I presented to them. The day was kicked off with a presentation that I gave on 21st century schools, and let's see if I can make this work. There we are. So I gave a presentation on 21st century schools and then asked them to respond as to which issues of those were most relevant to the future Winchester High School. One of the issues that came right to the top, and it was identified by all of the different tables, we had 5 different tables working, is flexibility for future change. And that concept basically is it's a rethinking of how one makes buildings. The traditional way of thinking about school is, tell me how you're practicing now, make me a building that works. What we're moving to is a concept that says, look to the long-term future, probe ways that teaching and learning is going to change, and give me a building that lets me do lots of those different ways without having to remodel the building. So we're looking for a platform for future change in the building design. That was followed then by table group, as I say, addressing these different issues. The issues were worked out with administration to identify the topics that were most relevant to the train of thought that's already been at work in the school and in the district. So it's not that I drop into town and throw a lot of new issues at the visioning team. It's that I jump in, meet them where they are, and then move ahead with focused issues. So we explored integrated cross-curricular teaching and learning. The school is currently departmental. Much of 21st century learning moves towards interdepartmental learning, so we probed and developed strategies on how to do that. We explored what school was going to be like in about 20 years. And that inherently involves a discussion of what the impact of technology is on teaching and learning. We looked at project-based learning, Then we identified the preferred or most effective methods of learning, anything from project-based learning to direct learning to service learning to STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, math, to integration of arts, et cetera. And then as a capstone challenge, we had our groups develop concepts of school organizational structure. I brought a couple of souvenirs from that work on my right over here. And in this, the teams developed pros and cons of different methods of organizing the school, and then by use of dots, identified the ones that seemed to have the greatest prospect. These are just steps in the process. These are 3 out of about 8 that we had. And where we are now is then that these need to be continued. But what we've got in our day of visioning is a good, solid concept for continued development. And next steps, in my opinion, would be to embrace others, both on the school side and on the community side, to assure that these ideas have traction. And if, in fact, they don't, then they fade out and get translated into something else.
Thank you, Frank. My name is Lorraine Finnegan. I'm a project manager with Sims Meany McKee. I'm an architect. Tonight I'm going to play civil engineer. I want to walk you through the alternative site study that we undertook. Early on in the year when we started this project, we were moving one path through the educational programming phase, and at the same time we were looking at the other path. What other options are there? Are there any other sites available in this town for a high school? We set some criteria for ourselves, a minimum of 16 acres, to give you some sort of sense of what that is. The Skillings Field site next door is 16 acres. It is about the smallest we would recommend for a high school of this population, close to 1,400 students that we're projecting for. So that was our minimum threshold. We kept items of location and access a primary concern in reviewing the sites. We looked at the topography, the wetlands. Most people in town know that there's riverfront issues, wetland issues, floodplain issues. We kept that forefront in our mind. And as we moved through the 12 sites, we highlighted 4 that we wanted to pursue further, so we have some more detailed information on those 4. To give everyone a sense of those 12 sites, this is a property of the town of Winchester. We looked at Lynch School, Westfield Fields, Parkhurst, Wrightlock Farm, Mullen Field, Mystic River Reservation, Sunset Road, Leonard Field, Skillings site, which we refer to as the ball field site next door, Middlesex Fells, obviously the reservation, Manchester Fields, and the Winchester Park Department, otherwise known as the Forest. Looking straight at the Mystic River, it's about 15 acres. It met our threshold. It is DCR state parkland. There inherently becomes some issues in taking that over. It had significant floodplain issues. So when you got down to it, the usable site area within here was less than 5 acres. It unfortunately fell off the radar pretty quickly for us. The Winchester Park Department land, town forest, it's on the southern border of your town. It's about 28.9 acres. It is the Park Department land. This was one we developed further information on. You'll see that slide on as we move forward. Leonard Field, about 12.7 acres, the low end of our threshold, but the usable site area was down to 5 or 6 acres, and we did not move forward with this. Mullen Field, which is this portion, my pointer not working. This portion right here, obviously this is Wrightlock Farm across the street. We have a separate slide for that. About 9.5 acres, again, Parks Department land. It does have some topography issues, so we were limited down to 7 acres. West Side Fields, 7.5 acres. It's contiguous with the Mahoney's property. We had a lot of conversation about private property. Were there other aspects we could look at? Were there other properties that might be for sale that could be reviewed as part of this? This was centrally located, but it would need some more contiguous land to be a viable option. Sunset Road, about 16.4 acres, quite a good size site, but it's almost all within a floodplain. Didn't give us much more benefit than what we're dealing with on this site. Manchester Fields, 12.5 acres next to the junior high. Again, we have quite a substantial amount of this site that's within the floodplains, almost 8 to 9 acres, so we're back down to 3 usable acres. Parkhurst, currently using it as swing space for Vincent Owens, may continue that conversation on this project as we move forward if we discuss swing space. It only has about 4.1 acres, but there is contiguous land with your water department and your parks department that could make it a more viable site. Altogether on its own, it is too small. It is a little difficult to access for the topography there in the back. So again, this was not one we pursued further. The Lynch School site, this is one we pursued further. I'll have a lot more slide info on it in a minute. But there's what appears like a lot of property out here. Obviously, we have the Lynch School, we have some contiguous land with the water department. But as we get into it, you'll see that there are some floodplain issues, riverfront issues, and well issues. Right Lock Farm, most people in town know a lot about this. We have more detailed information on this. It's 20.1 acres. Looking at it on paper, very attractive site for a project. There are some wetlands. There's definitely topography issues. There's some challenging topography out there. It's on the western border of your site, and I'll show you some more information. We did pursue this further. Skilling site, most people are very familiar with this. 16 acres on the, here we are right now, right in the auditorium. 16 acres on this parcel. I don't need to tell anybody about the floodplain. I'm sure most of you already know well about the floodplain. This is still a site that we're going to pursue. There's still work that's going on with the Aberjona River that may make this a viable site in the future. So what fell out of that initial investigation of 12 sites were these four: Lynch, Right Lock, Skilling site, and what I'll call the forest. So looking at the Lynch site, if you look at the total site, which includes water department land, we're looking at about 18 acres. 10.8 acres with the water department land. It looks like a reasonable size. It's a little disjointed of a site, but it is a good size until we start overlaying some of the project information. We have our water department property up on this side, but we have obviously the riverfront. 100-year floodplain coming right through the site. We also have a town well right in the middle of it. So it starts to make a really disjointed site. Add on the wetlands and the wetland buffer, and you'll start to see we get a lot less usable area over here. It doesn't take away the question, what do you do with the Lynch School at that point? So this just became, with all the factors on top of it, a little too much to overcome. The Right Lock Farm site, 20.1 acres, very reasonable size, does have challenging topography here in the rear of the site. It is adjacent to the Mullen Fields, so you could interact with some of those fields, maybe pull down a little on the 16-acre threshold. There are buildings that are part of this that are on the National Register, and there has been a registration restriction put in place on this site, which takes up 7.6 acres. We do have some wetlands. They're somewhat central. They are connected to the larger wetland. That doesn't mean you couldn't work around that. This is one of the more challenging aspects of it, which is the section from the that's on the Mass Historic, the house, as well as the preservation restriction, which leaves most of the area being the large topography swing. We have 60 feet grade change at the back of the site. So you understand at that point it no longer becomes an attractive option. Skilling site, 16 acres. The high school side right over here is 11 acres. Our pointer's just fading. About 2/3 of the existing Skilling site is within the floodplain. That will change with the improvements that are being made to the Aberjona River. It will significantly pull that back, but that takes time. So we're working in conjunction with the town and the town's consultant AECOM, who also works for us on this project, to look at the schedule of that work to see the viability. So this site has fallen out to continue to move forward to investigate options and to see how far down the road that would be. Obviously, the restrictions and the issues on this site with the floodplain are fairly evident to anyone who lives here. You probably don't need the map to show you. And what lastly came through was the town forest. We have 28.9 acres, almost 29 acres. The biggest issue with this is it would take an act of legislation to turn this over from parkland to town land. You also have to do a compensatory swap. So what land do you have to give back in place of that? The process for this can be anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So as we move forward looking at this site, it just did not seem valid in this project to continue moving forward with that option. We do have some wetlands, but there's still quite a bit. We've shown you roughly what the 16 acres would mean, this front portion of the site. So falling out from all of that, where we've ended up on the 12 sites, we're continuing to look at this high school site and the Skillings Field site. So out of all the 12 sites we've investigated in town, this is where we have ended up at this point. And this is the two locations, as I'll call it, that we're moving forward with on building options.
Good evening. My name's Ed Fournette. I'm an architect, and I'm the principal in charge of the project. Once we narrowed the site selection process down to a reasonable number of sites, we then started to test how we would put the program on that site. This is something less than a full-fledged design and something more than just a bubble diagram. It's a test geometrically to see whether or not the bulk of the program really fits on the site. The first thing we did was to look at what I'll call inward expansion. That is to say, although this existing building is a relatively compact building, there's spaces in between the buildings, in between the different elements of the building, where we could build. We could fill in those places, and that's what we're defining as inward expansion. So we tried 3 alternatives for exploring that. We also explored the whole notion of different levels of a new facility on this existing site, this piece of property here, as well as a new facility on the Skillings Field site. We're doing that for a number of reasons. The cost estimate is not complete yet for all these different alternatives, 7 different alternatives. And we need to look at a number of different alternatives to satisfy ourselves, to satisfy you, and to satisfy the MSBA, that we're making these decisions in a logical kind of methodical way. In addition to the alternatives that I'll be showing you, we're also looking at an alternative or costing out an alternative of just plain updating this building so that it'll last another 50 years without changing any of the functions, essentially updating all the systems. So that's kind of our base level renovation. So what is kind of the minimal thing you can do just to live to see tomorrow? This is your existing high school, and as you can see those open spaces that I was talking about where you could fill in. Just to orient you, this is the railroad tracks. Does everyone kind of understand where they are on the site? This is where you all probably came in this evening. This is the auditorium we're sitting in. This is the gym. This is the academic and administrative wing and the courtyard. That's your existing site, or existing building. The first alternative we looked at, this inward expansion test, looked at adding administrative space at the front door where it can help create a new image for the school, and also put administrative people in what we call the catbird seat, where they can control the comings and goings to and from the school. It creates what we call a commons, which think of it as a food court. It's the kind of civic center of the school. It's also the dining area. That would be placed in what is now the courtyard. And then we'd add miscellaneous space in order to fill out the entire program. Another alternative was do somewhat the same, but leave the courtyard open. Administrative space goes again at what I'll call the front of the school. And in that case, we're adding academic space here and a kitchen here. Commons in that case goes in this area here. But it's a very similar alternative. The next alternative is moves administration to the center of the school. We've kind of grouped these alternatives so the building committee and the people that ultimately review these can think of similar projects together. So these are all tests exploring what, like I said, is inward expansion. So we're looking at these things together and kind of comparing them to see which is the best alternative. Next, we looked at different methods of building new schools on the existing high school site. Again, these are the railroad tracks up here. In this case, although I have several diagrams that show at how this would be phased, this puts a new academic wing up here, a new auditorium here, new gym in this area, and the commons in the middle. Another alternative creates an academic wing in what we call the quiet side of the site, saves the existing auditorium and gym, and creates a new commons in the middle. And finally, if you can do that with phasing, you can also replace the existing gym in this area and here, this area. Then what we did is we looked at these set of three and are in the process of discussing the pros and cons of each of these alternatives. Finally, we tested out the Skillings Field site to see how a new building would fit there. There's slightly different orientation. You know, we really have to put a large button on the laser pointer here. This is the railroad tracks in this case. This is indicating the culverts that carry the water under the site. We can drive on those culverts. We can park on those culverts. It would be difficult to build on them. These arrows are trying to illustrate the fact that during most of the time, access to the site would be from this drive, but during floods, access to the site would be through the neighborhood area. That's essentially the alternatives that we've explored to date, and we'll be getting cost estimates for each one of those Friday. You want to just tell us?
Yeah, will you just move it to the next one? Thanks. Hi, I'm Cindy Boney. I'm on the school committee and the school building committee. I have absolutely no architectural background at all. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I want to thank you because your input and your interest is really vital at this point. And I'm going to encourage you later on to take the opportunity during Q&A to really share your ideas and let us know what you're thinking about. But more importantly, I want to thank you for being here in large part because come next fall, we, the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, the school building committee, will be asking you all to make a major investment in this building. And it's an exciting project for many of us. We feel it's a really necessary project. It's exciting not only for the students and the professionals that work here, but also because there's a tremendous opportunity to leverage this building as a resource within the community. If you think of the town as a campus, encompassing the library and the beautiful Lincoln Auditorium and school and McCall and the lovely Manchester fields, the downtown that the planning board has worked so hard on, the town hall, the Jenks Center. We have such a wonderful hub of a community here, and the high school becomes yet another resource for building that community, for sharing our experiences, and for having having value here. So whether you're 2 or 82, your family and the organizations you work for should be able to realize a value for that investment. So we've been reaching out over the last 3 months to stakeholders throughout the community. About 2 months ago, the EFPBC decided to sort of task a subcommittee to begin the conversation and open the windows for more ideas from the larger community as to what this building would look like. Charles Sekaris has been working with me, Helen Babcock, Forrest Fontana, Tom Halley, Carol Savage, Richard Howard has been helping us as well. And we've been calling, meeting, having gatherings with all sorts of organizations in town, rec departments, hospital, library, multicultural networks, performing arts museums. And Do you have the clicker? Yep. And through those conversations over the last couple of months, a few themes have come out. Really interesting, engaging ideas. Certainly, we see the high school as a place where students of all ages should be able to come in and take a cooking class. Perhaps seniors can come in and do some exercise in our gym. We would like to make sure that it's a place that inspires wellness. As residents are in whatever phase they are in their life, entrepreneurial literacy is key. If you are a mother and you're returning to the workforce, you may want to come in and get some career advice. If you are going back to school, this is going to be a great location for you to come in and use the services that are available here. Social connectivity and gathering. There are several people in the community who don't get out. Who can't have access to downtown lectures, who can't come into to library performances, but we are blessed to have WinCam here, and we'd like to make some of what's happening here become live virtually. Certainly creativity, artistic expression, and performance is a key element of what we'd like to see happen more on this site. We'd like to celebrate the arts and celebrate the great talent that we have throughout the community. But finally, there's also a great opportunity here for us to develop and model public-private partnerships, both through the programming, whether it be mentoring between business leaders and students, or just in the funding and how we design this building moving forward. So as we go from themes to actual components, they've really been broken up into two different categories. There's some inherent joint use spaces here. Certainly the auditorium for town meetings, cooperative theater, the gymnasium for adult sports clubs, large group instructions. The rec department offers a number of programs through this building on a regular basis. We need some meeting spaces. There are so many nonprofits in this town, and they need a place where they can get together on a regular basis that's easy to access in the evenings or during the day. Classrooms, obviously, and this idea of a commons. If you could visualize for me, the high school that will be here will not have a cafeteria. Cafeteria is sort of a thing of the future, or of the past. Imagine a common space as you walk out of the auditorium that'll have a food court where the football team might be doing a fundraising and selling coffee to town meeting members. Or a sports foundation might decide to have their banquet here, or WIFI might decide to have their banquet here. So that common area will become the hub of activity for the school, as well as a place where we can social and gather as a community. Bill talked a little bit, when we talk with the MSBA, there's some limitations about unique community spaces. These are community spaces that are not necessary for 21st century high school, as much as we may agree or disagree with them. And these are just a couple of the ideas that have come up, but I want to share them with you to give you some examples. We are blessed that we have WinCam here in the building. We would like to see them stay. They would like to stay. They would like to expand. And perhaps have a second studio where finance committee, other committees, nonprofits, lecturers, Jenks visiting speakers could come over and give presentations, and those presentations would become live using the WinCam capabilities. Certainly performing arts space, while this is a lovely auditorium with the charm of the train tracks right behind it, there's certainly a lot of opportunities for expanding the space and using it in a lot of different ways. We'd like to see more gallery space. We'd like to see more practice space. These are all ideas that are coming to bear. I don't think we can talk about community use without mentioning a pool. It comes up. People are very interested for a host of reasons. There's certainly health benefits. The MSBA does not feel that it's necessary that we have a pool. So moving forward on a community pool is something that we would need to do as a community independently. But there are tremendous opportunities for partnerships, for fundraising for that, for ongoing support for it through memberships. And this is one of the conversation pieces we're having. And certainly the fields, given the nature of the site that we're on, a tremendous amount of the resources in the construction budget will go towards site work. And I think that we should be clear that overhauling the Skilling's fields will probably not be part of a project unless we're committed to making that happen and we add that on as a community use and a community value that we feel strongly about. And then finally, just the Career Volunteer Center. This is something where we're just leveraging a program in a space that's here and making it more accessible to residents.
Thank you, Cindy. So whether the path takes us down a addition renovation project or an all-new school, sustainability is certainly something that we've heard in the community. We know inherently it is critical and important to this project. So just want to stress that this is very early in the process. The way the MSBA has asked us to look at the feasibility study, they are basically telling communities if you want them to participate in funding that you will have a green school. And so when you look at the chart up above and you see the idea that we'll be using the LEED criteria for schools, which is leadership and energy efficient and environmental design, that we're actually going to seek 50 points within that standard. So that would be seeking to capture at least 2 more percentage points of reimbursement on top of that baseline of 33% that we talked about very early on in our meeting tonight. So we know it's a goal. It's something the PBC is extremely involved with. They have set up a subcommittee, sustainability subcommittee. This will be an ongoing dialogue. When we get into the schematic design phase, that's when there will be a very engaged process with the community at large, and we look forward to having those conversations with you. They've stated energy efficiency is a priority. That's one of 7 categories within the LEED criteria that we'll be talking about during design. Sustainable sites is one of them. Water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, the indoor environmental quality, extremely important. We all know about some of the inherent issues with this existing building today. Innovation and design in the process, and then regional priority credits. So a lot of detail in there that we will get into later in the design process. So this August, there was a meeting, a public meeting with that Sustainability Subcommittee, and some of the criteria that we'll be talking about and some of the initiatives that are already happening in your community. Some very exciting things are the Cool Winchester effort, seeking PV grants. Those kinds of things are the exact type of program that we want to draw to any high school project and tie that into your core curriculum for your sciences and other spaces as well. And then there's also the composting initiative, tying that into a new cafeteria, kitchens environment is also an exciting thing, and a number of communities are moving in that direction. So September, our follow-up to that subcommittee meeting, there will be a complete overview of all the sustainable design criteria to be included in the project, and we'll start to really wrap that into our feasibility analysis and study. We're going to continue to study the current energy use practices. Again, this is really tied into your facilities groups across your community, very important. And then we're going to establish the overarching goals and priorities for the project moving forward.
Hi, I'm Neil Davis. I'm with Skanska, the owner's project manager. And what this slide shows, as you can see from the presentation, there has been a lot of progress on the project. This gives us an idea of the next steps ahead on the feasibility study with the MSBA. Early October, we're looking to submit the preliminary design program, and that will incorporate some of these alternates, show them an idea of what direction we're going with the design. Following that will be the preferred schematic report, and that will be in December, mid-December. And what that will do is that will be narrowed down to a preferred alternate, what the school's going to look like, from a schematic standpoint. The MSBA approval will be early next year, and that will allow SMMA to continue into schematic design. The schematic design phase will run roughly through the middle of next year, June, July, August. And at that time, we'll really be narrowing down the project and be going to the MSBA with what's called a project scope and budget. And that's what the project is, how much it's going to cost, and we're looking for that either in the summer or in the early fall, and that will allow for the town to bring it to a vote next fall. So with that, we'd like to open it up to questions. Any questions for me or anybody on the panel? One additional thing. The website that we're using, we have two websites, two links to the website. It's one website, but you can either go to the long link here, or there's a new shadow website that's winchesterhighschoolproject.com. winchesterhsproject.com, and that'll take you to the project website. It has a lot of information. It has all of the presentations throughout that SMMA has done up to this point. It also has links to meeting minutes and that type of stuff. We also have a comment line, which is winchesterhsquestions@gmail.com, and that those comments come directly into the EFPBC. We review the questions and respond to them accordingly. So if we can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Neil. Sorry. I had to wake myself up. No, just kidding. So what we'd like to do is to open the meeting up for comments, questions. We'd very much like to hear your ideas and feedback on anything that we've presented tonight. This is being taped by WinCam, so we'll be on. In order for your questions to be heard, if you would come down to the mic up front or speak very, very, very loudly.
Bill, thank you. I'm Lance Grensback. I serve as chair of the planning board. Several weeks ago, we responded to the request from the school committee and the FPBC to sort of gather together our ideas, what could be done here, and provide some input. We did that. Appreciate very much the time you spent with us. We put the comments in writing, so what I'm going to do tonight is simply summarize those, and Cindy has captured these. I think the comments, I'm going to organize them into 4 bins. The role of the high school in the town center, a look at some ideas on the site itself, the broader site, the Skillings Field, existing things, and access to that site, the specific building design concepts out there, and then the uses, which I think Cindy has things. The first thing I think we would ask you to do and keep in mind, and we recognize that this is, the MSBA will not encourage you to do this, but I think you need to think about the role of the high school and its building in the context of the town center. If you think about our town center and its structure, it's much divided by the river, the Aberjona, that kind of blue ribbon that winds through the ponds. To the west is most of the commercial part of the town center. To the east is the public sector, and we basically have an arc that goes from the high school all the way down to Manchester Field. It's a sort of a very green arc that houses all the public buildings, from the playfields at Cha-Cha Field and the high school, Jenks Center, the town hall, the library, and so on. It's very attractive. However, if you ask people to look at the town center as a whole and ask people coming through town, well, what do you think of that quadrant that's occupied by the high school? I think the answer is we don't see it. It's separated physically. It seems gradually different than the area, things like that. People tend to blink and close their eyes and they go by it, or they have rather, they sort of tired, shop-worn, and sort of difficult to sort of imagine it as part of the town center. So one of the things we would suggest you do is look carefully about how the new, both the landscape and the buildings relate to the town center, and see if you can connect it a little more closely. Right now, it sort of exists as its own pocket, not very well integrated into the town center. The second leg would be on access and the site itself. I think, as you have discovered, with the change in the FEMA floodplains, most of the downtown, a lot more of it than was 50, 20 years ago, is within the floodplain, which means it's a very constricted set of sites to sort of build on. If we're not moving out of there, one of the things we think you ought to take a close look at is uncovering the Aberjona River there. One of the issues we've seen in other developments upstream in the Aberjona, the hospital site and the other, is the problem of compensatory storage for floodwaters. You may, if you're going to be very restricted to the existing footprint of this building, that's one thing. If you want to step outside of it, it's our understanding, and look in the town center as a whole, that you're going to have to look at compensatory flood storage. So one of the ideas of the broader site is to think about uncovering the Aberjona and buying some flood storage area. The other area is, again, one of access. This building right now serves as a pretty good barrier between the Nelson Street neighborhood and the rest of the town center. If you stand at the Rotary in the town center and look around at the access from each of the neighborhoods, whether it's the Vine Street, Dick Street, areas up Main Street, along Winthrop, Mystic Valley Parkway, all the way around, almost all of them have direct and easy access, visually attractive access to the center. This is the one area in town where you have to crawl through the pigeon droppings under the T bridge. You have to walk through Shore Road or out Skillings, which has got to be one of the least attractive town bypasses that's been built in the last 50 years. But those are also the major access routes for students walking to school. Again, it's not the MSBA won't encourage you to look outside of the property lines, but the question of how you're going to bring students back and forth safely on routes to school and what that's going to be and how that presents itself to the town is critical. The other thing we want to encourage you to look very closely at is automobile access. We're doing a town-wide traffic study. We expect, and the models are beginning to show, we can expect fairly consistent, constant growth of traffic volumes on Skillings over the next 10 and 20 years. My experience in watching people bring kids and students driving to school in bad weather on the Monday mornings, it would do justice to an Australian rugby scrum. It's both confusing and borderline dangerous. I think the plan for the site ought to look very closely at how you move traffic, faculty, students, others coming into that area, move it safely in and out, and how people access in. Not critical to the building design itself, but critical to safe access to the community. The last 2 points on the building and use. It is today a very monolithic building, a fort, and not very attractive. If you decide to move off, and we understand the problems of the supports and sort of basically a bog and a swamp out there, but if you begin to move off of that, we would very much encourage you, and Mary McKenna, one of our board members, has put some sketches in, to look at a much smaller set of buildings put around a perimeter that are much closer in scale to the rest of the buildings in the town center, and also much closer in scale to the neighborhood behind it, and much more permeable. Again, the existing building and the alternatives we saw there would recreate sort of a Bastille out there that you sort of go into if you're a student. Nobody else can come in or go through that. We think, that may be the physical features of the site dominate and force us to do that, but it's pretty much an uninviting facility, and even if it gets a new front door, it doesn't connect with the community behind it and isn't sort of open to things. The uses, I will simply say that I think Cindy has captured very well all the discussions we've heard through the master plan meetings, all the town center discussions. We have heard very, very consistently, we lack public space for a dozen different opportunities, particularly educational and continuing education. If you're going to bring people into Winchester over the time to use the shops and the restaurants, one of the things the town ought to think about doing is leveraging its educational facilities and the interest in the arts and the communities here to bring more adults in, not just for business, but also for to use the town center area. So the list of wish list on the slide was very. We have a number of people on the board also who are hot for a pool and swim. Whether they'll actually show up there is another issue. Thanks. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't be shy, come right down to the mic.
Hi, I'm Lisa Young-Morrissey. I'm a Winchester resident. I have children in 2nd and 5th grade, and I'm very excited about the idea of a new high school. I'm also very concerned about this idea of a community center, and concerned in a good way. I think we should have it. But I'm thinking about the high school being reconstructed in its existing site and what will happen to Skilling's Field down the road. And is there any way that there is planning going on for that separately or in conjunction with the high school planning in terms of community use for that field after the culvert's been built? And is that, I mean, how are you going to address that with considering that you're not going to get refunded for, or you're not going to get as much, you're not going to get any dedicated use space in an existing high school building, really. It seems to me that dedicated space for community use should be any community building. And is that kind of, is anyone looking into that on Skilling's Field, along with the swimming pool?
I'm not sure how to, I'm not sure there is an answer to that right now. But the long-term use of Skilling's Field is not on our agenda right now, certainly. But I think it's a great point. And certainly, once we know the direction of this project, that certainly is something that should be thought about and future planning made. So I think we all would agree with that.
I guess my other concern with is the Skilling's Field is part of the high school property. So for it to become a community center, it would have to be an agreement between the school, the town, and most likely another private or private entity. Am I wrong there?
I think so, yes.
Good evening. I'm Christine White, and I'm a mom of a son in the elementary school of Morocco. I'm interested in this project holistically, but I have two thoughts that I'd hope you have some comments on. One is around transportation. I think that was echoed by the gentleman's comment earlier. Our community is growing dramatically, and I know that there's a large influx of new families. So I'm thinking predominantly from a transportation issue of how do we move people in and out of the space, whether it be drop-offs and pickups, bus routes. How do we make sure that kids can walk to school? How do we get leveraging either the bike paths that I saw mentioned in one of the slides? How do we get public transportation to work for us? I'm concerned about the infrastructure outside of the high school. It's going to impact the kids that come here. Second topic is security. As we talk about kids walking to school, as we talk about giving kids access to things like libraries and other community spaces, have we given some thought to some of the security issues that we may need to build in as we think about what does it mean to have a high school in 2030? Perhaps that came up in some of your brainstorming calls and meetings. But I think about disaster recovery, from a larger urban perspective. Have we considered how the larger towns' concerns about disaster recovery, evacuation plans, things like that might factor into the pure structure of the space and moving bodies in and out safely in communication with parents and the community itself?
So first, in terms of security, that will be a very important aspect of the planning for this building. And we're concerned about security around the site, certainly. And so that will go along with the program. In terms of crisis management, we have very complex, hazardous, and all-school evacuation plans. We have crisis management protocols that are in place in all of our buildings. and we practice those regularly, and we work with public safety and the other town departments on those plans. And actually, by law, we're required to do that. So we're in compliance with that, and our crisis management planning and plans are actually held up as models for other communities. We've been doing it for a long time, and so those would certainly continue and be updated with any kind of new project at the high school. In terms of transportation, the points are really valid. A very important aspect of any project that we do will have to do with drop-off, parking, all of the issues that we face now. In many ways, a new project, whether it's renovation or new, allows us the opportunity to look at those circumstances very differently and plan appropriately for that. And so that's an important part of the project as well. So Lorraine just gave me a heads up, which is good, that one of the issues of traffic and transportation was one of the factors that was reviewed, that was a component of the review of the alternative sites. And you can imagine the alternative sites that you saw, those would be issues that would come to the surface immediately. And so we're constantly thinking about those things.
It's hard being short. Michelle Nathan, I have a daughter who's not here, but in the high school, a son who just started 9th grade, and a 3rd grader. And we're constantly, I'm taking my kids to other towns like Somerville, MIT for math and science enrichment. So it'd be really nice if the high school would keep a focus on kids who are interested in STEM. And rather than me spending my money at MIT or Arts and Crafts in Somerville, other places like that, it'd be great to go to the high school and have space for these kids and also have more of a focus. I think there's a huge focus on sports in this town, which is fine, but there's not much focus on STEM.
Well said.
My name is David Anderson. I grew up in town. I graduated from the school in 1982. I'm an architect and currently the chairman of the Design Review Committee. And so just two different thoughts. I'm not surprised that we've sort of come to the conclusion of this site or that site, having not been able to really think of other alternatives that were going to work either. But in thinking about over the last couple months, what it was like going through this school, what was good about it. It was certainly academically a very good public high school. I did have the opportunity to go to Northfield Mount Herman for a PG year after, and the contrast in facilities was startling. But I think part of that, and that's fine, that's a different thing. But in trying to think about what was it that made the big difference in what the experience of going through the school was like, I could think, I went to Mystic School for 3 years, for 3 grades, and then Lincoln School for 3 grades, and then went to McCall for 3 grades, and then was here for 9th, 10th, and 11th. And maybe it's because I'm an architect and I like to look out windows, but I could describe to you every single view that I had in every single class that I had until I got to high school. And I could describe 2 views that I had in high school, one right behind the sachem and one out of the band room window. Because the building is so blocky, it's this sort of spread out pinwheel, so it has a lot of perimeter, but most of the classrooms are set back from the actual edge of the school so that there's a corridor. between you and the outside, and the quality of glass is lousy and all of that. There's very little to see. So everything has a certain flatness. The light has a flatness. And I understand whether we renovate the school or whatever, the quality of light bulbs will be better than it was in 1982. And I don't have to tell you, please design pretty classrooms. But there are aspects of the building as a structure that I wouldn't be opposed to taking the walls out and keeping the concrete frame and starting over with that. But there are aspects of the shape that just don't work for high school education unless you really reorient the way the corridors and essentially start from scratch in the configuration of the halls and classrooms. The other thing is sort of because of the way the building sits in the middle of the site, it is sort of weirdly related to or unrelated to everything that's around it. It's set back from the street. There's sort of the weird drop-off. What should be the quietest place in the entire school is next to the train tracks, which is not unfixable, but that was sort of an odd choice to make. The school doesn't really have a front. It doesn't have a big traditional front door, and it wasn't built to be like McCall. It's a product of its time, and this new building will be a product of its time as well. But things were sort of decentralized. You didn't have a big grand front door. But this definitely has a back end, and it is not an inviting back end to the Nelson Street neighbors. And it should. And the way that the parking lots are arranged, the way it relates to the back of St. Mary's, all of those things have a really, really central relationship between the school that kind of gets tossed off as it's not really so much a part of the town, and the relationship to the front and the sides. So I think as we go forward, I'd like to hear about how the site gets developed as a really critical, important component of how the building gets developed. So I understand the impetus to infill the empty spaces. I think that's a reasonable approach, but it exacerbates some of the problems that I've just mentioned. I don't know about, I think the concrete frame is probably pretty stout, and maybe we can go up, I don't know. But that seems like a reasonable alternative to infilling and making some of the existing problems worse. And of course, everyone will be interested in swing space and where that goes and how that phasing works. So I'm sure that's the Skanska's job to talk to us about that, but whether we end up with a whole series of portables in the meantime, sort of Stalag 17 style out in the field, it'll be interesting to hear. So I just like to hear those things as we go along.
Thank you. Very good points. Much of, I think every point that was made has been discussed already, and certainly well, speaking for myself, I agree with all of those, and I think we all do. I wasn't here in 1971 when the building was open. Were the tracks already here? I'm kidding. I was just trying to break things up a little. Tom?
I'm Tom Howley. I'm on the Board of Selectmen, and together with Carol Savage, we sort of volunteered our time to see if we could help out, particularly on the community use aspect of your work, and to try to sort of get traction in a way. And we thought that if we could sort of have a breakout session, if you will, in terms of a smaller kind of gathering where we sat around a table and we just kind of brainstormed, that would be helpful. And we focused particularly on the performing arts kind of groups in town, and the arts groups in town. And we had a discussion with them, which then ended up, in fact, including other people as well, like people like the Jenks Center, the Chamber of Commerce, the library. There were others that contributed to this conversation. And I would say that it was actually very productive because, and I would encourage if there are other people here who in fact feel the need to do something like that, to have a smaller session where you can sit around the table, I know that there would be people on the Board of Selectmen and others who would, in conjunction with what is going on here, would be happy to try to facilitate that and listen and see if we can try to bring some coherence. And I think that, in fact, there is coherence, that many of the themes that are being talked about now, that I think conclusions that you are reaching and things that we heard from Lance and from David and from other people, I think seem to be resonating and seem to be repeating themselves. And we're going to submit some notes. They're not final or anything like that, but they're a bunch of ideas, specific ideas, which I think deserve some consideration. And then there's some larger themes. And I will tell you, for example, just to start out in terms of who is in these meetings, the Friends of Music, Friends of Art, the Music School, Kidstock, the Next Door Theater, Winchester Cooperative Theater, the Jenks, the Griffin I mentioned, the Cultural Council, WinCam, the Library Chamber, the Rec Department, Connect and Commit, and there were actually others and sort of other engaged citizens who were part of it. And some of the themes that came out, one was that as much as possible we want to use the existing spaces that will be created for the curriculum within the high school. And obviously that could have, we'd like to think, have a beneficial financial impact by taking advantage of those spaces. But really, in terms of these groups and the people that we talked to, it was more about integrating the uses that are valuable to the community within the school building. To take shared spaces with students who are in this building, perhaps set aside spaces within them that could be closets that could be kept. You could put things that community organizations might use. But if it's a kitchen and there are going to be cooking classes that people are interested in, take advantage of those existing facilities. If there's an art facility or technology area in the school, try to share those spaces with the community in a way that makes sense operationally for the school and brings a real presence from the community in. And so that was this notion of really integrating these community uses into the existing school facility, I think was important. I will tell you that one of the existing facilities, maybe the one that I think more than anything else drew the interest of at least all the arts groups, was this room that we're in right now, and how deplorable it is in terms of not just state-of-the-art performance space, but let's just say, you know, decent high school community performance space. And so lighting, sound, all the things that any of us who have been in meetings here, you know, we're kind of amused by at this point, but still don't work very well. Green rooms, things that ought to be rehearsal spaces and the like. This auditorium, of all those groups, this auditorium was probably the thing that drew most attention and thought was really, frankly, the most deplorable. So aside from using existing spaces and then kind of connected with that idea was the idea that we've been hearing about the town campus, the town center campus. And that notion, I think, from a planning standpoint, maybe in terms of orienting our thoughts about the high school and the important role that it can play within it, I think is very, very important. And Lance spoke eloquently to that notion and about the role that the high school can play together with the Jenks Center, together with the town hall, together with the library, together with the Griffin, together with the McCall and Lincoln auditoriums. We have clearly our strongest asset, one of our strongest assets as a community is the town center. And the fact that we have so many real working public and private cultural and sort of public institutions that actually are concentrated here, and the fact that the high school is really not all that it can be in terms of its connection to that, I think is an enormous opportunity for us as a community, and we ought to really, really think about it. And in that respect, not just in terms of what the high school can do if it's open and used in a coordinated fashion with these other locations, but we also we wanted to look at what other facilities presently exist. We don't want to duplicate those. It became clear to us that in addition to this auditorium, there's a need for larger spaces for people to gather. Ideally, they would be flexible so that they could be divided up, and they would be conducive to having occasionally be set aside for performances, public meetings, other things. And we actually have a wonderful space that exists, but within it, it needs some serious help, and that is the town hall auditorium. And if we view that space there together with this space and other spaces that exist within the town hall campus, that could be, if it were really brought online in a way that was really useful and not annoying when you're having meetings and other things there, that could be a tremendous asset. We already have much of the asset there, and I recognize it's not part of this school project, but I think it's something that we want to consider as a community, how we might better utilize that space and bring it up to speed and have it play a part in all the rest of this. So in addition to the idea of integrating uses within the school, taking advantage of those spaces that already exist and trying to bring them up to speed, if you will, after we do that, it may be that there is, in fact, there are activities and uses that we think would be very valuable to the community but can't fit within the school here or any of the other spaces we have. And so we have been thinking about the notion of an additional space. It's been described as a community center, or it's been described as other things. But in terms of the groups that we've met with, one of the things that really intrigued us was the possibility that WinCam, which is looking to expand its studio space, they talk about 3,500 square feet, which is a pretty large space. They've been looking at other places around town, the Carriage House, other places. I think they have a notion in terms of their due diligence as they talk to other community broadcast systems, that to have more visibility, to maybe be in the town center where people can see them, would be to their advantage. And so the notion that, in fact, they might create an additional studio space, I'm making all this up, of course, but that might be towards the front of the building, that might have windows, that might have a separate entrance, that might have separate bathrooms, separate HVAC controls, and not only with their studio space, but have additional space that they could broadcast from, but would be large enough for community meetings, for art exhibits, for use by students, as well as the Jenks Center for dance classes, for other things, and try to leverage the strength of WinCam and their resources and combine it with perhaps resources from other kind of public-private partnerships ideas. That might be the additional space that could be helpful. The last thing I would say is that we have been looking at the swimming pool idea. We've got some very capable swimmers in town who have been looking at this. We have people from various Ys who are helping us. Charlie Skeely, who is the chairman of the board of the Woburn Y and has connections. We're looking at other communities. I will say it is a very daunting price tag as far as we can tell. And as we know, it's not going to be subsidized in any way by the state, it wouldn't appear. So we want to have a realistic, authentic discussion about that. We want to identify what that might look like, what we think it might cost from a capital standpoint, what it might look like from an operating standpoint. The prices, early prices, seem so high that we want to be realistic about it, but I think we should get that all out there so as a community we can decide if in fact there's enough support to try to privately fundraise something like that, or indeed perhaps share it with other communities, which might not be a bad idea if we could get a partnership going in that way. So, sorry I spoke for quite so long, but there are a lot of other sort of lists of specific ideas, many of which may or may not make sense, but hopefully it'll stimulate your thinking. And as a board, I know we are very engaged, very interested in being engaged in this process and helping in any way we can, the Board of Selectmen together with the town manager. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Carol Savage, and I just want to add one little PS to that fantastic summary. I had the privilege of sitting in on today's meeting, which was the discussion around the educational environment for the students in the building, and also have sat in on those discussions with the community groups. And the just PS is that there was a whole lot of synergy between what was said today about how we educate our students and what the community desires out of lifelong learning and the opportunity to leverage this asset as sort of the center of a community campus, that it just felt exciting that you all have the opportunity here to craft a vision for this project that will embrace learning, lifelong learning for the students as well as the citizens of the town. Very exciting.
Hi, I'm Catherine Curtis. I had 2 points I wanted to make. The first one I mentioned last time, but I wanted to sort of reiterate it. These buildings that we build in town often become overcrowded after very short periods of time. And I was wondering, I know the MSRB only lets you build in a certain percentage of sort of extra space, but maybe in the plans that you do, you could have an area where potential expansion could happen if 10 years from now we have a few extra 100 students that we need some space for over and above the maximum capacity, because that's happened fairly frequently in this town, lots of buildings, school buildings. And the second point follows Tom's. A bunch of us have been talking that are very interested in the swimming pool, and we wanted to get a sort of community group together that would look at this and talk about how we can support bringing a pool to the town. So if anyone's interested in that, come see me, give me your name, number. We were also going to have an initial meeting at the library next Thursday, September 20th at 7:30 p.m. So please come if you're interested in a pool, and we'll see what we can do to bring that price tag down.
Thank you. I'm going to take this.
Hi, I'm Charles Suckris. I'm an architect, and I'm also on the EFPBC committee, and I've been on it since its beginning.
Talk into the mic.
I'm sorry?
Talk into the mic.
I'm sorry. I just want to mention a couple of things that for the town to consider. One is, since I've lived in this town about 1965 or 66, I had two daughters who went to high school. In fact, they were in Mr. Anderson's class. The actions going on at town meeting between the budget between the selectman's office and the town budget and the school budget has always been a big fight. And the reason I bring this up, and I must say, in the last 20 years, I think it's a little bit calmed down, so it's a little bit more civilized right now. But there was a time when there was tremendous antagonism between the two. As a matter of fact, it took the town moderator to request a summertime meeting between the selectmen and the school committee to really resolve their differences. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I believe that this school it really sits here in quite an isolation. That is, the students come in for the day, they're in here, they're kind of locked in. The faculty come in and then they leave, and the townspeople hardly come into this building. What I'd like to see is some kind of transparency that encourages town people to enter the school, to use the facilities and so on, and not just at nighttime, so that there's a civic pride that's developed amongst people, say, gee, this is my high school, this is where my children or my grandchildren or whatever go. And so that antagonism doesn't, it could be somewhat nullified. I also have talked to some of the teachers here at this high school, and they don't feel welcomed by the community. A lot of them don't live in Winchester, and a lot of them have lived in Winchester, and they moved away, and they teach here. And so I think it'd be wonderful if somehow programmatically, as an overarching concept, and I know architecturally it's a difficult thing to do, but to try to get that sense of transparency so that the public, the students, and the faculty somehow get into a mixing pot. And how that's done, I'm not sure. You know, you can think of a cafe, and I might be sitting next to a teacher talking myself as a private citizen, students walking by and so on. How that's accomplished, I don't know. But I have a little story to tell you about Bowdoin College. Years ago, as an architect, I was doing a project out there, and there was a new president. And in every college, there's this classic town-gown relationship. And usually it's somewhat antagonistic. And he was determined to break that down. And what he did is he introduced the idea of having townspeople come on the campus, encourage them to come on, to have breakfast with the students and the faculty, anyone in the dining hall at breakfast time. And within 2 years, a funny thing happened. These adults who were coming in felt more comfortable in coming onto the campus, number one. Number two, as students who couldn't afford to go home, say if you lived in California or Chicago, for a Thanksgiving vacation, all of a sudden they were invited to private homes for that vacation. And that one act did an awful lot of having the change from the town and the gown relationship. And in this case, the students and so on. So that's one thing, just as an overarching concept. And I know that people have been talking about having a campus. The planning board has discussed this, and Tom just mentioned it, and I think it's a terrific idea. And how to really do this architecturally, I just don't know. And whether the town can afford all these things. But just as an overarching concept to try to get the faculty, the students, and the townspeople more as one. That's one comment that I have. Second comment is the idea of light. And I agree, my two daughters went to this school, and I used to teach in a civics class once a year, and to tap the resource of the community. And the civics teacher knew that I had an interest in historic properties. So what I did is I talked about our throwaway society, where you take a plastic cup, you throw it away, you take a building, you throw it away, and so on. So it was just a nice experience for me. And I could see, as walking around here, how dark the damn place was. And it was really pretty awful. That's the second comment. The third one is, I think it's a pretty ugly building and a pretty ugly site. And I think that the day it was built really wasn't a fine high school for the community. So that's my personal opinion. So to me, to transform the image of this thing dramatically is the only solution. So if the foundations were deemed to be so valuable that we're going to keep the building and adaptively reusing it, I'm saying you really wipe the thing clean down to its structural system and then start from there. And the very last thing regarding the site is it reasonable to, especially because of the town study that the planning board is doing on transportation, it's getting critical in this town. And I'm just wondering if there's a way for the school department to decree that a limited numbers of cars could be brought on the site. Now, I understand a faculty member has to come on and so on, but can we reduce the number of parking places rather than keep the number of parking places, thus enhancing it from a landscape architectural point of view? And especially the back. I think that the comment about the back of this thing, it's an embarrassment to that community. When you drive up there, every once in a while I drive up and I'm just shocked at how ugly it is. So anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, I think.
Hi, Mary McKenna on the planning board, also an architect, and I just want to follow up on Lance's and Davis and Charles' comments tonight. I think, sorry about that, I think what we're all hearing tonight is the want for a neighborhood campus, neighborhood in scale. And I would hate to see the foundations of this school drive the programmatic and community decisions of the site. We have a major hulk in the middle of this school, in the middle of this site, that has no relationship to the community, and I won't talk about that anymore, but he has already. But I would like to challenge you to look at the site and not have your hands tied by the existing building and the existing foundation structure. And perhaps the existing building could become the swing space for the new school as it's built around the existing building, and then that gets taken away, and the end becomes a playing field and a surge place for the floodplains. So I would hope from an engineering point of view we put on new eyes and really look at the foundation in a new light and the site and really consider the neighborhoods, the river, the green space, and connecting to the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we're all done, Bob Johnson, town meeting member, Wright Lock Farm, and a few things. Bill, I got a bit of a technical question. I'm not a technical guy, but during the geotechnical study, this relates to the rebuild or remodeling of this school. It came out that the state had new standards on the seismic standards and so forth, and they needed the drawings from the footings and the pilings from before. They were lost, but they've been found. has it been enough time now to determine whether those drawings are going to give us the information you need and so forth, and how it will go forward?
No. As of tonight, we have not received the information yet. We believe that the information has been located with the original geotechnical engineer that worked on this site. And it was noted on their archives that they have the data, so they were going to be putting that together and sending it to our town engineer and to SMMA. So we expect that very shortly, which is good news in terms of allowing the consultants and our architects to have the data they need to accurately plan for what those codes require. Okay, seeing no one else coming to the microphone, we would urge you all to stay tuned. I think within the next few days, our goal is to post our a list of upcoming public meetings where we can continue this discussion, continue to update you on the progress of the feasibility study. You saw the next step milestones on the last slide, and so this is a process that over the next 2.5 months will be coming to a conclusion on identifying a preferred option to send into the MSBA. Yes, it'll be on the high school website. So you can go to Winchester High School, WinchesterHSproject.com. That'll bring you right to the website. And there's a link on the school's main page. Is there a link on the town hall website? And there's It is there on the town website, we're told. We'll send out magnifying glasses to everyone. So we're looking forward to this continued public discussion, and you also have the opportunity to send comments to the address up on the screen. So again, thank you very much for your participation tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.